Welcome to another special Saturday edition of Daily Dose of Septuagint, and I'm excited to turn our attention from Codex Vaticanus, which we've looked at for several videos, to another major manuscript of great significance, both for the study of the New Testament as well as the study of the Greek Old Testament, known as Codex Sinaiticus, as you can see there on the screen. This manuscript contains the entirety of the New Testament, as well as most of the Old Testament and some deuterocanonical or apocryphal books. Other parts of it are missing. And if you've done any studies on the Greek New Testament side, you'll know it as, based on its siglum, the Aleph, or its Gregory Eland 01. It's of great significance. And in this particular video, we're not going to necessarily do any specific reading. We'll get to that in subsequent videos. I just want to kind of give you a general overview of the manuscript. And I will be using my own facsimile copy of it, produced by Hendrickson Publishers. But if you want to take a look at some high-res images and also find out more about it, there's a great website that you can see there on the screen, codexsinaiticus.org, and highly recommend that. You can zoom in and do all kinds of great stuff with the images there. Let's talk a little bit about the history, because that is part of the question. Pinning down exactly how this manuscript came to public light is kind of half the battle, and there's lots of rumors about how it was found and claims that it was about to be burned and it was rescued and so forth. But as far as we can tell over the past several decades, as historians have tried to put together the story, here's the basic set of facts as we know them. But again, even some of these are disputed. The codex draws its name, or at least its current name. It went by a different name originally, from the Sinai Peninsula, where it was found. And specifically, it was found in the St. Catherine's Monastery, which you see there on screen. St. Catherine's is one of the longest continually operating monasteries in the world, and it is located here in the sort of southern third of the Sinai Peninsula. Rumor has it that because of its high walls, visitors back in the old days would have to enter in through this door. Of course, now it's a tourist attraction and a little bit easier to get into. But because of its remote location near actually the foot of Mount Sinai, because of its high walls and so forth, it wasn't really ever conquered, and it didn't receive a lot of sort of physical threats over the eras of wars and pillaging and so forth, unlike many other monasteries. And so that's one of the reasons why it's still in such good condition and has been operating ever since. Although sadly in 2025 at least, there's a bit of a tug of war going on over it between the Egyptian government and the British government as to what its future will look like, but hopefully it'll continue in operation. Now, how do we get the manuscript from the archives of this particular monastery? Well, according to the official story, at least, the first known recorded viewing of this manuscript by a Westerner, at least, is found in the journal of this Italian naturalist and scholar named Vitaliano Donati. And in his travel journal from 1761, he claims to have visited this monastery and seen a beautiful, square-shaped, well-produced Bible parchment with a certain style of handwriting from amid the archives. And so there does remain some debate about whether that actually is Codex Sinaiticus or something else. The general consensus is that he's probably describing what we now know as this particular manuscript. But more famously is the discovery about 80 years later by Constantin von Tischendorf. In 1844, this significant German scholar, well known for his text-critical labors, he was kind of a Indiana Jones of his day, traveling around the Middle East, finding manuscripts in other places. He, after like a 2-week camel journey, found his way to St. Catherine's. It was kind of off the beaten path, and was allowed to go in. And while he was there that first time, he sees about 100 or some odd pages from the Old Testament side of this beautiful manuscript. And he knew at the time that this must be something quite significant. And he was able to negotiate, essentially borrowing about 40 of these leaves or pages to take with him back to Leipzig, where he very quickly published them. In 1845, the next year, another scholar named Porfiry Uspensky also viewed the manuscript and took some of the pages back with him to St. Petersburg. In 1853, Tischendorf goes back, gets a few more fragments, and then in his final visit in 1859, he was actually on official business by Tsar Alexander II. And this is where things kind of get a little bit tricky in terms of reconstructing what actually happened. But apparently he's able to negotiate the transfer of about 347 pages to go back to Cairo, Egypt, so that he can have better access to them and examine them. He was able to apparently negotiate a loan to take that from Cairo back to Russia with him, but there's also the existence or alleged existence of some sort of disputed letter claiming that the people running St. Catherine's actually intended to give this entire manuscript to the Tsar, and that part is still debated. Whatever the case, in 1859, Russia got the bulk of the pages of this manuscript, and Tischendorf, too much fanfare, published a facsimile of it in 1862. And in due course, by 1869, there was official paperwork that sort of legitimized the transfer from the archbishop there in the Sinai Peninsula over to the Russian officials. Fast forward, though, to 1933, under the Soviets, there's a need to raise money. And so the Soviets sell the bulk of Codex Sinaiticus to Britain in 1933 for about 100 British pounds. And the rest, as they say, is history. Over the subsequent decades, a few more pages have been found at St. Catherine's. And so what's interesting about this manuscript, although you can buy the facsimile that has essentially all of it that we're aware of, at least, it's not complete. We're missing portions of Genesis and Exodus and so on. But the fragments and the different pieces are found across actually 4 institutions. The bulk is the British Library, where you can see it on display. A certain chunk of it is still at the University of Leipzig. Portions of it are still actually in St. Petersburg in the National Library of Russia. And then you have a few remnants still actually at St. Catherine's Monastery. And they have a sort of mutual agreement to facilitate the study of the manuscript. Either way, it's quite complicated in terms of its history. That's essentially what we know. Of course, there's a lot of other rumors and other unsubstantiated claims, but that's sort of the basic facts of how it gets from the southern Sinai Peninsula in the early 1800s to ultimately mostly in Britain by 1933. Well, here's what the basic layout of the manuscript kind of looks like, a good representative page. You'll notice, in contrast to Vaticanus, Sinaiticus in most portions, excluding poetry, is actually 4 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nicely justified there and well laid out. And that's pretty common for these mega majuscule manuscripts. And if we zoom in just to kind of look at a few features, this page is actually from arithmoi, and arithmoi is numbers. And so we don't have some of the opening books of the Old Testament. They perhaps were used as binding in other manuscripts or were otherwise lost. And you'll see that this script here is a nice biblical majuscule, as we call it. The letters are rather blocky, although, of course, the standard round letters like Omicron and Theta and so forth are round. But in essence, the letters you're trying to fit them in these imaginary lines. And so it's often called sort of a square script or a uncial script. Very, very similar to Vaticanus in basic style. Many times the horizontal lines will be quite thin and the vertical lines will be much thicker, as you'll see. And we'll get a feel for that as we take a look at it. Couple other things to point out. Sinaiticus is a very well worked over manuscript. And this is true both in the Old Testament side as well as the New Testament side. It was not only copied by multiple scribes, but it was revised, corrected, and so forth by another chain of later scribes at various points in times. And so you'll often see, probably a bit more than you see in Vaticanus and some other manuscripts, you'll see these marginal comments and text critical corrections. This one has a little siglum here that points you earlier in the text. Some of the things that we've seen before, or some other examples. If you go over here on the other side of the page, you'll see that some of the pages are nice and clean. Some pages are much more damaged. But again, we'll see things like deletion dots here and so on. So we'll get into some of that down the road. We can flip to a different page. This is actually from Isaiah 5 and 6. And so a bit of a cleaner page, at least by the looks of it. But again, you still see marginal comments here. This is a text critical correction added to the top by the scribe, kato emblepsantai kai there, so added somewhere into the text. A few other things to notice. You'll see some paragraph numberings here. We saw those in Vaticanus. And so this one on the left is, lambda equals 30. And so this one is 31. Lambda alpha, lambda beta, it would be 32. Lambda gamma would be 33, and so on. Much smaller chunks than our standard chapter numbering. And if you look elsewhere, again, you'll see some marginal notes and corrections. And in fact, you'll see a lot of places, at least on this page, where things have been re-inked. You see that later on, Subscribe did some corrective work and surgical repair. You'll even see a portion has been cut out here. And so those are just some of the kind of neat features that you can look at when you actually look at the manuscript, just how it has this very organic, rich history. It was used for a long period of time and continuously improved, or sometimes I suppose deproved, if you will, as various users, both on the Old and the New Testament side, made corrections and so forth. So in the next few videos, we'll take a look at representative passages, get a feel for it, read some. But for today, just wanted to sort of give you the lay of the land as to what this looks like and its history and significance. So stay tuned for more down the road.